family. I am really excited today to welcome the Reverend Redonia Thomas. She has come down. She serves the Bethlehem and Laurel Creek Charge in South Greenville. And Redonia and I are actually in a clergy covenant group together. And so our group, we have breakfast every other week. And right now we're having breakfast over Zoom. So we sit at our kitchen tables and we eat and we Zoom and have breakfast. But we've been in this covenant group for at least 2 years now, right?
At least 2 years.
At least 2 years. And so that's how I've gotten to know Redonia. And so in light of George Floyd's murder and everything that's happening in the world, one of the things that we're trying to do is give people the opportunity to hear from voices and people that are different from what they typically hear from. And so I'm grateful for you coming today and for the opportunity that we have to have a conversation. And just to kind of begin, George Floyd's murder has really created this kind of eruption of racial tension that already existed, but has brought it to the surface in a way that some people, white people especially, are seeing kind of for the first time. And so in light of it's been almost a month now, what has this been like for you as a Black woman?
Well, before I answer that, Laura, let me first of all thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And just thank you for having conversation like this, because I know it's very painful. It's painful for your congregation. It's painful for us. But you all are being very courageous, and I do want to thank you. So when I think about all that's happened with George Floyd, let me just say that particular day when I saw the tape, I was just numb. I just said, Jesus, what is going on? Of course, it was very painful for me as a mother, as a woman, having a husband and a son and brothers and nephews. It was very painful. And my daughter and my niece cried all week, and they kept calling me, and that was painful for me. And we had seen a lot of things like this, not to this degree, so blatantly public. Growing up, I've experienced a lot, but I just felt like, what's happening in the world that everybody is standing around, and in broad daylight, somebody can do something like this, and three other people are just right there watching, and nobody stops it.
Do you mind sharing maybe some of those conversations when your daughter called or your niece called?
Well, they were just so upset. And my daughter kept saying, laws, they need laws, Mom. They need policies so things like this don't happen. And all I could say is, honey, there are so many laws, there are so many policies, and this continues to happen. If people's heart does not change, nothing is going to change. And that's why I feel like it's the job of the church. My niece, they were just hurt, just hurt.
And I think a lot of what we're talking about is potentially there's a need for both. Obviously, there, I think, are policies that need to change, but I think hearts also have to change. And that's part of what we find ourselves in right now, which is why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think it helps to bring understanding. And I think there's so much power in individual stories. And so, in thinking about your own story, and especially for people who might not have seen or experienced this and been aware maybe of racism surrounding them, can you talk about when was the first time that you really experienced racism?
Just to tell you my age a little bit, I grew up, I'll say this, in the 60s. So I saw a lot of things, but I grew up in a Black community, a Black church, a Black school, and around a very large extended family. And so I was very much protected growing up, but made aware of things, how we needed to carry ourselves when we were away from our parents, away from our family, and aware of things that were happening in the world. I remember when I was just a little girl, and I don't even remember how old I was, maybe 3, 4 years old, I don't know. But I remember a lot of commotion, talking, things going on in the house, and I was standing in the window looking, and there was a cross burning. And I didn't know enough to be afraid or anything. I just knew that it was something that was happening. I remember when I was growing up, my grandmother, I would go into the store. My grandmother, we lived with my grandmother until I was about 7 or 8 years old. And we would go downtown. And I just remember my grandmother calling this man, Mr. I don't know, I'm just going to say Mr. Wright. And she would say, now, Mr. Wright, I need such and such. And he, well, Mary. And I was like, well, Grandma, because we were taught, we always said, put a handle on people's name. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't understand as a child why this man was calling my grandmother by her first name when she was calling him by his, last name, which we called respect at that time. And my grandmother, and I was like, Grandma, he's calling you. Like, she snatched me back, like, shut your mouth. But my school, I was in a black high school in the 10th grade, and a freedom of choice form came up, or a program came up, because it was during a period from 65 to about 70. Everything was pushing for integration, schools to be integrated. And my parents, my whole family are big on education. My dad would always say, whatever is in your head, people can't take away. You've got to go to school. You got to study. And so it was about 66. My parents made me choose to go to the white school there in town. There were I left a class of maybe about 45, my class, to a high school, predominantly white high school, with about 50 black kids in the white school and almost 1,000 white kids. And it was just pure agony for me. I left a very sheltered, loving school, community. All my teachers were black, my friends, and I went into an environment where people felt or treated me as if I had some kind of disease. And people would jump out of my way and didn't want to touch you. If you were coming through the door, they would run to move out your way in case you would touch them some kind of way. And then, of course, we got the N-word every day. I mean, it was just, and then, you kind of expected things like that from the students, but the teachers would skip over us. They would just really be indifferent towards us. If you had, most of the time there were about 3 or 4 black students in my class, and she would go down the row, and every black student, she would call names, and they would skip you. So they never gave you a chance to respond in class or do anything. But I always felt like they were honest with our grading. I felt like they gave me my grade, even though I felt like I didn't get any extra help or anything. We had a math teacher there who was I felt like he was very accepting of African American students there. So, but it was just all of the things you do in high school, the proms, the dances, and different things you do to come together, we were left out. You had to have a ticket to get to everything, and of course, nobody sold you a ticket. And my parents, you know, when I think back, I would not have done that to my child. But I always said it was the worst years of my life forever until it's still the worst years that I've ever experienced growing up. But something helped me, and that is my 50th class reunion. They had asked me if I would come. The president of the class, she asked me if I would come, and I was like, no, I'm not coming. She was like, well, we really want you to come. And I said, why would you want me to come? You didn't want me then, right, when I was in school. Why would you want me to come now? And she said, Redonia, we were terrible. We did awful. We treated you all so bad. And I said, yes, you did. And she said, we were young and we didn't know what to do. She said, our parents were telling us what to do. And we just did she said, we just didn't know. And she said, please come and give us an opportunity to have your forgiveness and for us to treat you better. And there were three African Americans that graduated in my class. And she said, we can't find the other two black students that graduated. Do you know where they are? And I said, no, I don't know. I tried to find them, but I couldn't. And but I asked my husband, I told my husband, I said, I'm a pastor. If we can't begin to forgive people when they ask for forgiveness, you know, what kind of pastor am I? What kind of person am I? And I'm leading God's church. And so he agreed to go with me. And so we went. And when I left, I told Jenny, I said, I have found a way to let go of some of my hurt from that. And I thanked her. And she told me, thank you, because it felt like giving her a chance to apologize as well.
You know, I know you have two children, a son and a daughter, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so can you maybe just talk briefly about, you know, because I know something that I hear a lot about, and in conversations as I listen with people, is that conversations that Black parents have to have with their children are different than what are happening in the homes of white families, because it is a different world. And so can you talk a little bit about, you know, raising your two children and maybe ways that is different?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've lived in Greenville since my daughter was 18 months old. She was born in Iowa, but my son was born here in Greenville. So we lived in Taylor's, all white community. And Rudolph Gordon is my cousin. And so he was telling us where the best schools were. Mm-hmm. And that became a primary thing with my family growing up, and even as an adult with my own children. I wanted them to get a good education, because it's difficult enough being Black, but you cannot compete if you don't have an education or a decent education. And so we bought a house over in Taylor's. My daughter went to Brooklyn Elementary School and on to Northwood. And Northwood, well, elementary, and my husband grew up where he went to a white school from maybe second grade.
Okay.
And he was always in a white school, and he was always a minority in there. He said there were very few blacks that went to that school. So his message to the children was, you have white friends, and that's okay in the elementary school, but you need to know that when you get to middle school, they're not going to let you be friends with their children. And when they start to pull away, you need to understand why. And so in middle school, my daughter started to have a lot of problems. But strangely, her problems were with teachers. They weren't with, even in elementary school. She was telling me the other day, she said, Mom, this one teacher, I just loved her so much. I couldn't wait to be in her class. I just thought she was so nice. And she said, and I got in her class. Mom, she was so ugly to me. She treated me so bad. And she just, I tell her, let it go. Okay, you've got to move on. But she'll go back from time to time and talk about how bad this teacher treated her. And if we went to the school and said something to the teacher, my daughter said she would do things like pat her hard on the back, just do mean things. And until she was saying, Mom, please don't come to the school anymore. Don't say anything. My son didn't seem to experience all the racial kinds of things that my daughter experienced.
And your daughter, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I know her name is Laura.
Right.
But she's around my age.
She is 39.
Okay, she is a few years older than me. But but just even for people as they're listening to think about, like, this is something that we're talking about in relatively recent times.
Well, she was born in 81.
Right, but still, but your daughter, she's still a millennial, right? Well,
it's right on the cusp.
She's still a millennial. So just thinking about generational and what that looks like, I think it's easy for us to think about racism that's something predominantly in the past. And that's not really what we're talking. It wasn't yesterday, but we're not talking about something that was a long time ago. So
right. The thing with my son had good white friends, but again, I worried about his interactions with the adults.
Right.
And so he was over at one of his friends' house one day during graduation. And he didn't graduate, but I think it was somebody just in the grade above him that graduated. He was in the 11th grade. And so he was hanging out at his friend's house, and there was a lot of people hanging out over there. And I called him and I said, Charles, you need to come home. He said, well, Mom, we are having a party, and and he hung out with them, and I knew where he was, and I knew the kids. Well, the girl, this is the story my son tells me. The girl liked one of the boys that was there, and they didn't want her around. And so she called the police and said they were having a party and they were drinking and they were doing drugs and everything. So my son, I'm not saying he's perfect or anything, but the police came and all the kids had been drinking or smoking. But he said there was a guy with a guitar, and he loves music. And so he was spending time with him playing the guitar and singing or whatever. And so he didn't drink or he didn't do drugs. So when the police came, and I had to go pick him up, and the whole street, it was just a neighborhood. And they must have had 10 police cars there. My son said they made all of them line up. They said, well, where he was not drinking. So they said, well, where's the drugs? And he said, I don't have any drugs. I haven't done anything. And they made him strip before everybody, drop his pants. And he said, why do I have to strip? I don't have anything. And they said, well, we don't believe you. And they made him take off his, not his, all his clothes, but down to his underwear. He had to take off everything. And my husband was just livid.
Did they make anybody else do that?
They didn't make anybody else do that. He was the only black child there. And so my husband is from Kentucky. He grew up in Kentucky. And so he has not experienced all the things I've experienced living here in the South. And so he followed that up. And, of course, well, we felt like he had something. And so his friends even said, he doesn't have anything. But they did that anyway. And then one day my son was walking down the street with one of his other friends, and a lady said she heard a gun go off. And I think it was during 4th of July or something, somebody shot a firecracker. And he said, Mom, the police stopped us and searched us and wanted to know where the gun was. Well, I mean, he was like 12, 13. But he has had experiences like that. And so as an adult, I was just very careful with him. You get stopped by the police. We say, call us right away. But now it's like, don't put your hand on anywhere but the steering wheel and those kinds of things. But that's my fear. My son is not an aggressive kind of person. My husband would be, why did you stop me? You don't have that right. He would say all of that. But my son is not going to say all of that. He will just keep his mouth closed and do what they tell him to do.
I'll switch gears a little bit. And the Sunday after George Floyd's murder, you preached a sermon that was called Church, What Are Y'all Doing? And I listened to that sermon, and you talked about how you think the world needs the church, maybe both in generally and especially in light of what's going on. So can you kind of briefly summarize some of what you talked about in that sermon?
Okay, I will try.
I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, or just really not even the sermon, but just the thought process behind that. I mean, I know because we had Covenant Group that week before you preached that sermon.
Right.
And so in our call, you were talking about kind of what you were thinking and stuff like that. So do you mind sharing a little bit of that?
Well, I'm just looking at George, Brianna, Rashad, Audrey. It's just like these people die in the streets and die, and it's like nobody cares, nobody's accountable. And when they come forward, well, you really didn't do anything that bad. And that's how it seems to us. And that's why the Black Lives Matter thing, it's not so much that no life matter. My message this past Sunday was God declares you matter. Looking at I think I stuck with the lectionary on that one about the birds that fall. He saw the bird. He know if a sparrow hits the ground. So how much more he cares about us. So I wanted to say all life matter. We matter to God. And people are saying Black Lives Matter because it seems like to the world we're of no value. Nobody really cares. I just don't know what I would do if I learned something like that about my son or my daughter. It would hurt me so much. Even as a pastor, I know we're going to all die. And I'm not really afraid of dying. But our children are seeing us do these things. And somebody's learning from what's being done. And so I ask, where's the compassion for the church? Where's the justice? Because I'm looking for the church. If we don't stand up and do more. Today, my back is hurting me a little bit because we gave out 240 boxes of food at the church. And that was a good thing. But I think we've got to do more. We've got to have more conversations like this. I think people need to be around people and talk to people to find out that, hey, I bleed too.
Yeah.
I love my kids too.
Yeah.
I want good for them, a good education. I want to live in a decent neighborhood. So I feel like we just need to talk and interact. People will find, unless there's so much hate, they can't do it, but they'll find that, hey, I'm just a person just like you. I just came in a different skin color, but I'll let you cut my hand, my blood's going to run red just like your blood.
Yeah.
So I don't know. During COVID-19, this is a very, very difficult time for a lot of people, and there are a lot of lives that have been lost from families. And so it's a stressful time. But I think the church is the place people are looking. They're looking for answers.
Right.
They're looking for something solid. And I say they're looking for the one foundation, which is the church. And as leaders in the church, we need to reach out to people in ways to help them find Christ and to help them grow in Christ, because people come to Christ, they come as babes. So
yeah.
There's a growing time for that.
Redonia, I really appreciate your time and you coming here and the opportunity to have this conversation. And I mean, whether in our covenant group or even more conversations for Advent, I look forward to continuing to grow and learn from you. I mean, not just as a Black woman, but as a colleague and someone who I respect in the ministry that you're doing.
You.
And I'm really grateful for you joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And let me just encourage you, please don't stop doing this. And I hope people will find value in it. And this is I say if anything can come good out of George Floyd's death, let this be it.
Yeah.
People have conversation and learn that, nobody is trying to destroy the world. We're not trying to destroy the world. We're just trying to make a living in the world and be okay.